Well, we spoke earlier in the show about Australia's out of control immigration rate, and we certainly aren't alone. US Vice President JD Vance has delivered another blistering assessment of Britain, this time claiming it has been stifled by migration.
Whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labour economies or importing cheap labour through our immigration system, cheap labour became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labour, you've seen productivity stagnate.
Joining me now is Sky News contributor Darren Grimes. Darren, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. Is JD Vance right?
Oh, Danica, too bloody right he is. I mean, good to be with you, but even better to hear that from the common sense VP that JD Vance is. I mean, the man he's committed here the cardinal sin, and I've seen so many screeches from the lefty hordes online for him noticing what's plain for all to see, that actually a country like Britain importing workers instead of actually training our own people here. And you look at the stats and surprise, surprise, productivity has sank down quicker than a pint at my local pub. You know, these are the kinds of pubs as well that used to be bustling centres of community. That's the kind of community element that's been utterly shattered by the importation of cultures that are utterly alien to our own, that simply do not countenance assimilating into our way of life. So much so that most of them, a great deal of them at least, don't bother learning the lingo. So JD's right that we've created an economy built on Deliveroo drivers and Uber rides, some not speaking English, instead of actually engineering and invention, the kind of stuff that powered the first industrial revolution that Britain was responsible for. So all we can do is pat ourselves on the back about diversity quotas and how multicultural we are, even though it's not working. So he isn't wrong. He's just bold and brave enough to say it, unlike the absolute cretins in Westminster who'd rather open borders than open a factory full of British workers.
No, you're spot on. And I just think it's this multiculturalism experiment that's just failing Western countries right now around the world, Darren. Look, meanwhile, people smugglers are reportedly telling migrants that, look, all they have to do is wave at Britain to be rescued in the English Channel. It comes as gangs are increasingly competing for business. So, Darren, a right royal wave apparently is all it takes to be picked up and welcomed into Britain with open arms. Exactly, there it is.
Absolutely. All you need is a dodgy dinghy, a strong paddling arm, and the ability to wave like you're hailing a cab in London. And voila! Welcome to Hotel Britannia, full board paid by the taxpayer. You know, these people smugglers are making an absolute mint because we're basically offering them a service that's better than British Airways. You've got no passport, you've got no ticket, you've got no questions. Don't worry about it. Just a boat and a sob story. Well, actually, Danica, the sob story element isn't even a necessary prerequisite. You don't need that because we mugs here in Britain, we let them stay anyway. Once you're here, well, good luck getting rid of them because our European human rights that we have by a court over in Europe, attached to a body that we were supposed to have left, we're so slavishly devoted to them that they'll throw a tantrum if you so much as suggest deportation of someone who has quite literally broken into our home. We as a British people are being demanded to actually acquiesce to the demands that say that human rights trump our right to basic safety. And, you know, try deporting a bloke, for example, that has 17 convictions and a machete, and the Strasbourg court will actually turn around and say, well, it's a breach of human rights to his love of chicken nuggets. And that might make, I like to make people laugh, as you well know, Danica, but genuinely, that one isn't a joke. That was a genuine story that took place.
Oh, my God, what is going on over in Britain? I've told you this before, Darren. I look over and I think, You know, we're not doing too well here in Australia, but goodness me, you've got big problems over there. Now, look, we have to turn to Prince Harry, of course, and this saga surrounding his past drug use. The Heritage Foundation has filed a second lawsuit to obtain his immigration records. It comes after heavily redacted documents were released earlier this week by the US Department of Homeland Security. Look, Darren, we still don't know if Harry lied on his US visa when it comes to past drug use, but he was obsessed with talking about drugs in his memoir, Spare, for goodness sake. The Heritage Foundation believes he's lied. How do you see this playing out now?
Yeah, he didn't think this through, did he? Quite clearly. I'm not sure he has the mental capacity to be able to do so anyway. But look, the fact of the matter is, Danica, if the rest of us, if you and I admitted to hoovering up half of Colombia and its infamous marching powder before breakfast, well, we wouldn't be granted a US visa anytime soon, would we? We'd be on a no-fly list. But poor little Hazza, he gets the red carpet, and it's all because he's a prince with a podcast and a persecution complex. There's no other way of explaining it. And what the Heritage Foundation, a US think tank, has done is just asked a question. The question is really simple. Did he get special treatment from the Biden administration because he's got the right kind of victim narrative and politics? And the documents that Homeland Security released, they're redacted to within an inch of their lives. The pages were about as blank, Danica, and useless as a Meghan Markle cookery book, which I imagine is coming out pretty damn soon. You know, there was more scratched out black ink than a Guardian editorial on, I don't know, gender pronouns in the Aussie outback, right? We don't need another Netflix documentary. We need a visa form. And let's be honest, on the notion of them returning with the tail between their legs, the British public, I tell you this for free, they would rather see Meghan and Harry self-deport permanently to Mars, not back to Blighty. I'll tell you that for free.
Oh, what, you're telling me you wouldn't want them back in the UK, Darren? Come on, you'd welcome them with a right royal wave yourself on the English Channel. Let's be realistic, Darren. Darren Grimes, always nice to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this evening.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.